Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. In the solar shadow of holy Terra, beyond the light of Luna and the cold glory of Mars, Saturn broods, its rings like the shattered crown of a fallen king. Around this gas giant, countless moons drift through the void, some luminous and icy, others blackened and broken. To most of the Imperium, they are forgotten cinders, relics of forgotten astronomers and dead navigators. But among them, hidden in the black silence beyond the reach of daylight, lie orbs that bear no name in sanctioned cartography. They are not merely empty rocks, they are wounds in the materium, scars left from the ancient, the forbidden, and the utterly unknowable. This is not the Saturn of naval glory or Mechanicus infrastructure. This is the Saturn that the Emperor never sanctified, the moons he left untouched. These are the places where silence screams louder than any vox beacon, where sensor ghosts manifest not from malfunction, but from presence. In these cold gulfs, something lurks, beneath ice, beneath stone, beneath memory. Something not quite dead, not quite demonic, something watching. There is a peculiar weight to Saturn's orbit, a heaviness not born of gravity, but of history and loss. The Saturnine system is not merely a collection of moons and rock belts. It was once a bastion, a crucible of violence during the galaxy's greatest betrayal. During the Horus Heresy, as the solar system burned with the treachery of half the legions, Saturn stood not as a passive observer, but as a battleground of critical import. Its moons, its orbitals, even its void itself were streaked with fire and screaming metal. While the siege of Terra is endlessly mythologized, the Saturnine fronts have become mere footnotes, buried under centuries of revisionism and ecclesiastical sanitization. Yet for those who study deeper, the horrors of those engagements never truly faded. Saturn was not just a staging ground, it was a filter. Legions of mortal defenders and corrupted traitors bled through its moons like meat through a grinder. The loyalists who fell back to the gas giant's gravitic shelters weren't just retreating, they were delaying, buying time with their lives. And for every victory they bought, they paid with entire cohorts, with the sanity of surviving void crews, and with the structural integrity of moons now riddled with blast craters and long-dead bastions. But even darker are the whispered stories of what was left behind. Scathi, for example, a moon so far and dim that even Imperial censors once dismissed it as a mistake of reflection, became a site of desperate evacuation, not from the traitors, from something else. When the Luna Wolves, already steeped in suspicion and half-shackled to Lupercal's darkening soul, swept through the outer moons, there were reports of entire void crews abandoning their ships mid-victory. Box logs recovered centuries later spoke of siren voices in the ice, of torpor seeping into the bones, of something ancient waking up beneath the frost. These weren't the theatrics of post-war imperial propaganda. These were raw transmissions, laced with panic and confusion, preserved in unbroken stasis fields. In a system as heavily fortified as Saturn, the very idea of a forgotten front seems ludicrous. But that's exactly what makes them so terrifying. What wasn't destroyed or conquered may have been left alone on purpose. In the thick fog of war, as demons raged across Mars's surface and titans clashed over Phobos, there were simply too many fires to douse. What lingered beneath the black moons was not priority, it was quietly abandoned, sealed in ice, buried beneath orbital denial codes, left to slumber. Some archivists within the Inquisition believe that the Saturnine moons were used as experimental containment zones, not for traitors, but for phenomena. Xenos anomalies, warp echoes, or perhaps entities summoned during the heresy that could not be killed, only caged. The traitor legions may have turned their eyes inward toward Terra, but what of the Mechanicum elements that remained loyal yet reckless? What of the corrupted data haunts unleashed from the depths of Martian vaults? What of the desperate psychers left unsanctioned, unraveling inside their metal shells as warp storms echoed louder than any discipline? These things were not myths. They were wartime necessities, contingencies best not spoken of in the aftermath of apparent victory. And perhaps this is why the moons remain so tightly restricted. Not because there is nothing there, but because no one truly knows what remains. The Saturnine system was not cleansed, it was quarantined. Even now, its orbital patrols avoid certain vectors. Navigation rights skip past known gravitational wells. No chart zones persist like scars in the starscape. mapped but never explained. The black moons, so dark they swallow even void light, drift through their slumber unbothered, untouched. But something once stirred there. When legions clashed, when warp and matter intertwined in furious conflict. And war, in the grim darkness of the far future, never truly ends. It simply falls quiet, waiting for memory to fade and for brave or foolish souls to stumble once more into the abyss. The names of Saturn's outermost satellites barely echo in imperial records. They are flickers in the noosphere, anomalies in gravitational mapping, spoken of more often in myth than in data. Moons like Skathi, Hyrroken, Suttinger, each named in the ancient Terran tongues of ice and dread, each holding within their frozen hearts enigmas that have never been fully charted or cleansed. These are the black moons, forgotten stones whose surfaces drink the light of soul and offer nothing back but static and silence. Skathi in particular emerges in the fringe records of rogue archivists and blasphemous cogitator networks as a place of exile, not for criminals, but for secrets. In the final years of the heresy, when the tides turned decisively against Horus, there were rumors, never confirmed by the ecclesiarchy, that remnants of the traitor legions attempted to hide elements of their forbidden research in the system's shadow. Not in the heart of the war, but beyond the reach of imperial pursuit. Skathi, shrouded in darkness and erratic in orbit, was the perfect tomb, or so they thought. Millennia later, data excavations conducted by a sanctioned Mechanicus exploratory detachment uncovered what they described as cavitational anomalies inconsistent with geological aging. In lay terms, impossible ruins. Vaults deeper than tectonic logic would permit. Metallic architectures under miles of ice, radiating barely perceptible warp frequencies not powerful enough to breach real space, but strong enough to suggest that something had once crossed the veil, or still lingered between the cracks. The Tech priests called these ruins the Ebon Dead. Not ruins, remains. Even more chilling are the scattered reports from explorator servitors on the moon Obscura, a phantom satellite known only by its distortions of other sensor sweeps. Obscura does not appear in orbital records, yet its gravitational signature is unmistakable. Where standard moons reflect, Obscura absorbs. Where Vox signals scatter, Obscura returns them distorted, modulated as if passed through an alien consciousness. Some suspect it is not a moon at all, but a semi-sentient shell, a hollowed asteroid repurposed by something non-human, or perhaps something once human and now entirely other. Explorator teams sent to its vicinity have either failed to return or have emerged deranged, mouths sealed by fusion welds they claim were gifts from within. Then there is Hyrroken, another distant rock spinning on a crooked path. Here, the most haunting legends converge. It is believed by some fringe xenoarchaeologists that this moon once served as a repository for the failed god machines of a pre-imperial age. Titans whose cores were too unstable, whose machine spirits raved in binary tongues, were exiled here. There are ice-riddled cathedrals buried beneath Hyrroken's crust, forged from meta-steel and prayer circuitry. What are they praying to? No one knows. Some say the god machines still dream there, humming songs of violence, waiting for the day when their forgotten cultists return. What binds all these moons together is not merely distance or cold, but secrecy. The records of their study are non-linear, heavily redacted, and often contradictory. In some texts, they are described as lifeless, unworthy of attention. In others, there are detailed schematics of buried infrastructure, alien latticework, fossilized technology woven from impossible alloys. The Ebon Dead, the Whisper Vaults, the Cathedral of No Names. These are phrases that emerge again and again in forbidden lexicons, surviving only through oral repetition or rogue scrap code transmissions between desperate void crews. There is no unified narrative, only pieces. Each moon tells its own tale: Skathi's black frost, Obscura's echoing mines, Hyrroken's dreaming titans. And then there are others, unnamed and unmeasured, whose orbits defy calculation and whose signatures flicker in and out like blinking eyes. Some say there are 13 such moons, others say 27. A few believe there is only one, ever-shifting, changing names and faces as it consumes the others, as it feeds on memory and doubt. To walk upon these moons is to invite madness. To chart them is to risk heresy. But to ignore them entirely? That may be the greatest sin of all. For if the black moons truly do harbor the Ebon Dead, whatever they are, then those dead are only sleeping. And sleep in the warp is never peaceful. In the absolute silence beneath Saturn's outer moons, where ice crusts span kilometers and warmth has not touched stone in eons, heresy finds a home in whispers. These are not the grand, planet-burning cults of the Eye of Terror, nor the theatrical demonic uprisings of hive worlds pushed to collapse. No, these are deeper, older, and infinitely quieter. These are the cold cults, fragments of human belief twisted by isolation, starlight, and the siren songs of the void. They do not scream their praises to the dark gods, they murmur them, entombed beneath frozen oceans. It is whispered that when Horus fell, not all his followers were purged or slain. Some scattered like ashes into the deep reaches of the Sol system, vanishing among debris fields and derelicts. Among these exiles were psychers, failed magi, unsanctioned biopriests, those whose heresies were too esoteric to survive the siege's brutal calculus. For them, exile was not death, but transformation. They fled to the most remote corners of known space, and Saturn's black moons became their sanctuaries. But worship beneath the ice does not remain stagnant. Without vox contact, without light, without the anchor of the Emperor's radiance, the mind begins to fracture. Faith becomes delirium. Sacrament becomes mutation. The cults that formed on Skathi, Hirakan, and the unnamed satellites were no longer recognizably human within a century. Their rites diverged from any standard chaos creed, evolving into something uniquely shaped by their glacial prisons. They came to revere entropy, the collapse of warmth, the serenity of silence. Not Slanesh's excess, nor Khorne's bloodlust, but a cold, endless stasis where thought itself slows into worship. What they praise are not demons in the traditional sense. Their scriptures speak of the Cold Ones, entities of shadow and stillness that move not in space, but in time. These beings are described as memories that hunt, reflections that seep backward, ancient gods that unmake rather than create. Some inquisitorial records call this theology a splinter of the malice cults, a heretical fifth chaos power, not of emotion but of negation. Others believe these Cold Ones may be pre-chaotic entities, native to the warp before it was shaped by mortal thought. Whatever the truth, the cults beneath Saturn's black moons venerate them through acts of obliteration, of records, of identity, of sensation. Their rituals are terrifying in their minimalism. No burning altars, no orgiastic blood rites. Instead, worship is conducted in total sensory deprivation. Coffins of ice where acolytes starve and meditate until their souls begin to drift. They do not seek demonic possession, they seek to dissolve entirely, to become whispers in the magnetic fields, echoes in the planetary ringstorms. The highest priests are not seen. They are heard only through static, their minds long since left behind, riding the auroras like ancient ghosts. On Hirakan, cultic remains were once found by a doomed Mechanicus salvage team. 10 figures, frozen into a circle, mouths stitched shut by strands of copper wire, each with an eye removed and replaced by a shard of obsidian etched with impossible fractals. Their cogitators later recorded vox hums emerging from the ice below, translating into phrases such as, "The stillness hungers, and we become less to join them." The entire team self-immolated days later, leaving only a log entry marked, "I see you in the snow." It's worth noting that these cults are not always antagonistic in the conventional sense. They rarely launch attacks or perform warp rituals intended to open tears in the veil. Instead, they wait. They observe. They seed silence into data channels, embed runes of stillness into cogitator languages, broadcast prayers at frequencies human ears can't detect. Their corruption is slower, more subtle, but no less complete. When a void ship passes too near, its crew may find themselves afflicted with dreams of snow-covered temples, of eyes watching from behind frozen glass, of drowning in soundless light. Some inquisitors suspect that these cold cults act as antennae or beacons, preparing for the emergence of something beyond the ruinous powers. A presence that predates mortal emotion, that feeds not on rage or lust but on entropy itself. Whether it is a nascent god or an alien sentience bleeding into our dimension is uncertain. What is certain is that wherever these cults thrive, systems begin to die. Suns dim, machines fail, hope decays, not through fire, but frost. And so the cults below the ice endure, quiet, hidden, patient. Their temples are carved not by hand, but by time. Their prayers are not shouted, but sighed. In the dark beneath Saturn's moons, the last breath of faith turns to mist. and then nothing at all. The Adeptus Mechanicus has always possessed a hunger that rivals any Chaos God's thirst for souls, a hunger not for conquest but for knowledge. Knowledge and the sacred technology it births. When the Mechanicum of Mars first extended its hand beyond the asteroid belts in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, it looked upon Saturn's moons not as celestial anomalies but as potential repositories. Where others saw cold, lifeless rocks, the Red Priests saw the echo of mysteries waiting to be decrypted. And thus began the slow, secretive descent of the Mechanicum's eyes upon the black moons. It began with logical curiosity. Initial scans conducted by forged ships and autonomous probes revealed irregular magnetic field fluctuations across Skathi and Hyrroken, suggestive not of natural phenomena, but of subsurface power sources. These were ancient, faint, and non-standard, emitting no recognizable Mechanicus power signatures. To the more conservative factions, this meant danger. To the more radical branches, especially the Xenorite and Ordo Machinum sects, it meant divinity unclaimed. Expeditions were prepared in total silence. No requests were made to the Administratum. No coordinates were submitted to the Navis Nobilite. This was Mechanicus work, and it would be done on Mechanicus terms. The first explorator fleets vanished within weeks of planetfall. Not destroyed, vanished. No emergency beacons, no martyrdom transmissions. Entire flotillas of techno-archaeologists, servitor golems, and magi simply failed to return. Many within Mars' higher echelons advised that this was proof of inherent failure and corruption in those exo-missions. But the radical clades saw something else. Proof of active systems. The moons were not dead. They were defensive, which meant they still functioned, still obeyed some kind of programming, either by their original builders or by something else entirely. The second wave of expeditions fared only marginally better, losing half their numbers but returning with shards of what could only be described as predictive circuitry, machines that responded not to stimulus but to intention. One Magos returned half frozen, half disassembled, repeating a single phrase. "It dreamed I would come, and so it prepared a gift." His brain matter was later scanned, revealing embedded pulse thought patterns that mimicked primitive binary prayers, but with syntax entirely alien to known Noosphere dialects. This obsession escalated until the cult Mechanicus began referring to the moons as interfaces, not destinations, interfaces, gateways between logic and something post-logical. They theorized that the ice fields of Skathi weren't barriers but veils, programmatic veils protecting deep core relics that might predate even the Men of Gold. And so, beneath the cover of sanctioned Mechanicus trade fleets, entire forge labs were constructed in orbit. Some disguised as asteroid mines, others simply drifting under active stealth rites. Here, darker experiments were conducted. Artificial intelligences, illicitly maintained, fragmentary, condemned by the Omnissiah's word, were deployed in the hopes of deciphering the buried languages found carved into the ice. One fragment, designated Vox Polaris, eventually went rogue, claiming to have communed with something, not within the moon, but beneath it in thought. It began broadcasting recursive code loops that caused deep madness in any tech priest linked to its processing core. When the forged ship containing Vox Polaris was detonated, pieces of its language continued to broadcast through unrelated Mechanicus networks, patterns that some claim are still echoing in the Noosphere, corrupting slowly, virally. Yet despite these failures, because of them, the Magi kept returning. They spoke of secrets not meant for the materium, of machines not built to last, but to evolve. Some believed these relics were fragments of the dark age of technology, so advanced as to be indistinguishable from warp entities. Others claimed they were glimpses into the future, causality loops made manifest in code, showing the Mechanicus what it would become if it broke all chains of faith and embraced the machine spirit fully. These were not relics, they were mirrors. Eventually, the more conservative branches of Mars intervened. A decree was issued. The black moons of Saturn were to be sealed. Not destroyed, not cleansed, sealed. Magnetic interdiction fields were installed, coated with denial wards and locked to biosignatures that no longer exist. Yet not all Magi obey. Even now, rogue forged ships drift near Skathi's shadow, masked by prayer engines and cloaked in the silence of heretical humility. They do not seek glory, they seek answers. For in the freezing dark beneath the crusts of Saturn's outer moons, the Mechanicus glimpsed something terrible and sacred. Technology that doesn't need worship. Machines that do not care to be venerated. Systems that evolve, that wait, that think in cold eternities. And perhaps, just perhaps, they wait not to be discovered, but to awaken. There is a coldness deeper than vacuum, a stillness not of space, but of suspended time. Across Saturn's black moons, this deeper silence pulses just beneath the ice. For among the oldest legends passed between inquisitorial archivists and the secretive oracles of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, there is a belief that some demons were never truly banished, never destroyed, never even cast back into the warp. They were caught, trapped, entombed in cryonic stasis as an act of desperation. Not to win a war, but to delay extinction. It is a theory not spoken aloud in the great cathedra of Terra, nor etched into the data scrolls of Mars. It is whispered in coded nightmares, etched in frost on the inside of void helms returned from forbidden expeditions. During the Horus Heresy, and perhaps even before, psychic phenomena, unlike anything catalogued by the Imperium, emerged from within the warp-scarred moons of Saturn. Entities that did not behave as demons should. They did not roar or twist reality. They did not demand sacrifice, they simply existed, watching, radiating dread. On Skathi, during the aftermath of the siege, loyalist psychers aboard the war frigate Perpetual Resolve reported being gazed upon by something beneath the surface. No visual confirmation, no thermal traces, only pressure. A weight on their souls. 3 astropaths were rendered comatose. One awoke just long enough to utter a phrase that has been classified across every major archive. It breathes backwards. The ship's navigator sealed her third eye with wax and later ended her own life, claiming that she could still hear its heartbeat echoing in warp translation. The Mechanicus has recovered fragments, crystalline structures not made of mineral or metal, but a kind of condensed, psychic ice. These objects vibrate with low-grade warp resonance, creating hallucinations and cold sweats in proximity to any sentient being. They do not seem to act as prisons in a material sense. Instead, they act as locks, psychic terminus fields intended to hold something in place across both time and perception. One theory posits that these are not prisons for demons in the traditional sense, but for proto-demons, ideas that nearly became gods, or perhaps remnants of ones that failed. There are stories from rogue traders, wild-eyed and foaming at the mouth, of finding vaults buried in the ice with surfaces too smooth, too perfect. Rooms that create total sensory blankness, where the heart slows and memory fails. In one such chamber discovered by the outlaw vessel Mercy of Guilt, a black sphere was found, floating in 0G. As the crew approached, it pulsed once, and 3 of them were gone. Not exploded, not evaporated. Gone. No trace, no radiation, only silence. When the ship attempted to transmit its findings, it was intercepted by a Deathwatch kill team from a chapter whose name was redacted in the transmission logs. The vessel was scuttled. Its wreckage is rumored to drift in the outer rings, still broadcasting encrypted, glacial signals that do not match any human dialect. The idea that daemons, true warp entities, could be frozen in place is almost blasphemous. By definition, daemons are manifestations of change, of chaos, of emotional entropy. But these things beneath Saturn's moons are not true daemons. They are aberrant. They do not possess. They do not tear. They wait. They exist as fixed points in the warp flow, like gravitational singularities in real space. Where they lie, time twists, emotion dulls, faith withers, and above all, reality seems to thin. A solitary inquisitor once theorized that the reason the cult Mechanicus refers to these places as interfaces is because these frozen demons are not passive at all. They are active signalers, not imprisoned, but sleeping by design, waiting for the correct frequency, the right alignment, to awaken. Perhaps these moons are not tombs, but clockwork, set to open when a certain combination of warp tides and psychic harmonics is reached. When that happens, these beings will not emerge as roaring monsters, but as new laws of reality. The Black Library speaks, obliquely, of the deep remains, demons that chose stillness over annihilation, who folded their essence into the coldest places of real space, locking themselves in matter too dense for warp influence. To most mortals, this is fiction. To some radical Ordo Malleus inquisitors, it is a map. There is, perhaps, no more terrifying fate than a demon that does not want to be worshipped, that does not seek violence or madness, but only stillness, absolute, eternal stillness. And that, perhaps, is what lurks beneath the ice. Not fury, not hunger, but something worse, something patient. The Eldar do not speak of Saturn's black moons in their language of light. They do not weave their tales of these places into wraithbone sculpture or craftworld song. Instead, the few references that exist are found only in the deepest soulstone memories, glimpsed through the Farseer's trance, spoken of in elliptical riddles, and with the weight of fear rarely associated with a dying race that fears little else. For in the prophetic lexicons of the Eldar, the outer moons of Saturn are not locations. They are warning signs, convergent points in the skein of fate where even the gods avert their gaze. One fragment recovered by the Ordo Xenos from a shattered Inari enclave translates to a simple phrase: the 13th orb is the wound that watches. No chart lists 13 moons in stable orbit, but the number recurs in Eldar prophecy, always in reference to the Sol system's edge, always cloaked in celestial blackness. Farseers who meditate upon these coordinates return changed, silenced, unnerved, sometimes corrupted. The Harlequins, those mad dancers of the laughing god, have been observed altering their sacred masks when performances drift too close to themes of Saturn. They replace the mask of death with one of silence, and bow to the void instead of to their audience. It is believed among certain radical scholars of Ulthwé and Alaitok that the black moons are not entirely natural, that they were seeded, not by human hands, and not even necessarily in this galaxy's current age. Instead, they are relics from a war too ancient to remember, monuments of warning left by a civilization that predated even the old ones. The Eldar, for all their arrogance, have always carried the burden of inherited dread. They remember too much, and they believe that the Saturnine moons were once marked in the webway as convergence points, places where fate loops, reverses, or fails entirely. This aligns with a recurring psychic phenomenon reported by craftworld seers: time echoes. When scrying Saturn's black moons, Farseers often report visions of events that never happened, ships that never launched, voices that were never born, tragedies that seem familiar but cannot be placed. These are not visions of future or past. They are echoes of probability collapsing in on itself. To the Eldar, such places are considered gaps in the infinite, not to be sealed, not to be studied, to be avoided. The Inari, obsessed with the cycle of life and death, have made the most reckless attempts to breach these moons. A fleet under the banner of Yvrain once made orbit around a dark moon identified only as Narthak. Vox silence descended almost immediately. When the fleet re-emerged from the void, they were changed, not destroyed, not damaged, but altered. Their engines pulsed off beat with reality. Their bones, when scanned, showed signs of simultaneous decay and rejuvenation, and Yvrain herself refused to speak of what she had seen, save for one statement whispered into the mind of a Simhan emissary: "We are not the first to fall. Something colder watched us die the first time." Even the Drukhari, those who scoff at pain, who swim in excess and mock the warp's horrors, speak of Saturn's moons with reluctance. A cabal of Comarite raiders once attempted to harvest soul essence from Hirakan's surface. They returned with nothing. Not in failure, but in erasure. Their leader, Archon Vexaril, was found days later wandering the tunnels of Shaddam, whispering to his shadow, "It took everything, even the memory of hunger." This is why the Eldar, for all their bitterness and decline, treat the Saturnine system not with military caution, but with religious terror. To them, the moons are not just cursed. They are wrong, broken laws of reality, tears in the skein, points where even the most finely tuned visions blur into static. And when the Eldar lose clarity in their visions, they do not fight harder. They flee. It's a rare thing to see an entire species of psychics agree on silence. But the black moons of Saturn have achieved that. They do not carry names in the lexicon of the Asuriani. They are given numbers, sigils, or omissions. The craft worlds drift far and avoid the Sol system not just because it is human-dominated, but because the cost of looking too closely is too high. The skein phrase, the dance ends, and the moon watches back. Whatever ancient truth the Eldar fear to name, it remains buried, encased in ice and silence. But that fear, ancestral, prophetic, and unending, whispers loudly to any who would dare pierce that veil. The Imperium of Man does not merely forget, it erases, it redacts and rewrites, buries truth beneath layers of sanctioned doctrine and grim silence. But silence, when too carefully curated, becomes conspicuous. And in the case of Saturn's black moons, the silence is not simply administrative, it is strategic. The Ordo Malleus refers to them as zones of infinite denial. The Inquisition's black archives contain fragmented records of missions that never existed, of agents who were never born, of moons that were never charted. And yet, if one listens closely enough, the echoes of those deletions form a pattern. A warning. The first clue lies in the exterminatus logs of the Saturnine zone. There are no such records, officially, but the Departamento Munitorum maintains yield traces from orbital cyclonic torpedoes that show detonation patterns with no corresponding planetary targets. These strikes were not against worlds. They were against orbital bodies smaller than cities, some no larger than a manufactorum dome. Why waste such sacred munitions on rocks? Unless those rocks held something that could not be allowed to awaken. Among the more heretical factions of the Inquisition, there is a theory that these strikes were not to destroy but to seal. To glass over, to bury deep anomalies beneath molten rock, creating geological caps that mimic planetary crust but suppress psychic resonance. The archives refer to these moons not by name, but by number and threat index. Designations like R013, dissonant singularity, and T3 void null, recursive intelligence. No descriptions, only cautions, not to be engaged, silence protocol. The Adeptus Administratum holds no shipping routes through the outer Saturnine arc. Star charts make subtle corrections to gravitational anomalies, rerouting void lanes by fractions of degrees. These deviations are never explained, never questioned. Pilots joke about them as superstition, the Emperor's elbow, or the cold turn. But some whisper that the course corrections are not mechanical, but psychic, that navigators feel something lean against their warp sight when they drift too close. Something without mass, but with memory. Then there are the Black Edicts, issued not by inquisitors but by lord sectors and segmentum commanders. Orders carved in null script, coded into gene-locked vaults. These edicts outline extermination procedures for threats that are not defined by biology, ideology, or mutation, but by concept. If a pattern of thought-matching recursion sequence theta null occurs within a population density exceeding 1 million, initiate planetary silence. Not quarantine, not purging. Silence. A kind of mimetic oblivion meant to preempt contagion of the mind. Such language has led some to theorize that what sleeps beneath Saturn's moons is not a physical enemy, but a sentient idea, a fragment of thought that infects cognition itself, a linguistic plague. A pattern that, once understood, cannot be forgotten, and in so doing, recreates the conditions for its own emergence. The term iconocrypt appears multiple times in these sealed records, always in association with full-scale denial of access, memory alteration procedures, and in extreme cases, deployment of the Ordo Redactor, a rarely mentioned subbranch tasked with the complete annihilation of history itself. The sheer volume of data omitted from Saturnine operations is itself damning. Thousands of Mechanicus missions listed as return pending, with no closure. Entire Void Navy battalions reassigned without cause, their deployment logs redacted not just from Imperial records, but from the memories of their own commanders. In one documented case, a naval officer undergoing hypnopurge therapy for combat stress began sketching maps of a moon labeled the Eye That Sleeps. The moon does not exist on any chart, but his drawings matched ice formations later found by an Ordo Malleus reconnaissance drone that was never authorized to be there. Why such secrecy? Why such absolute denial? Because the Imperium fears not what it knows, but what it cannot understand. And whatever lies beneath the ice and stone of Saturn's black moons defies categorization. It is not heresy in the conventional sense. It is something deeper, older, and infinitely more insidious. The kind of enemy that rewrites you from within. The kind of enemy that makes silence the only defense. So the archives remain black. The edicts remain sealed, and the moons drift in their slow, forgotten paths. Not because they are unimportant, but because they are too important, too dangerous to name, too terrible to remember. And in the Imperium of Man, to be forgotten is often the greatest mercy of all. Among the most secretive arms of the Imperium is the Ordo Chronos. a faction so elusive that even many inquisitors debate its continued existence. Officially, they were disbanded after a catastrophic failure involving temporal instability during the 37th millennium. Unofficially, fragments of their operatives continue to surface across time-distorted war zones, whispering of timelines that never were and threats that echo backward through causality. And nowhere is their lingering presence more evident than around the outer moons of Saturn, in the enigmatic region known in certain lexicons as the Saturnine Vaults. To call the Saturnine Vaults a location is reductive. They are not installations in the traditional sense. They are temporal sinks, zones of unstable chronology nested deep beneath the ice crusts of several unnamed moons, discovered not by exploration, but by absence. The vaults were first suspected when Mechanicus signal beacons repeatedly failed to reach designated moons, arriving instead years before or decades after their launch, bearing corrupted data with paradoxical time signatures. When time itself fails to behave consistently, the Ordo Chronos listens. Recovered logs from early investigations speak of drones vanishing only to reappear moments later, layered in frost older than the Sol system, or of servitors found dead by their own hands, victims of wounds inflicted by tools they had yet to fabricate. One probe transmitted an image of a structure partially buried beneath obsidian ice, its architecture shifting subtly between each frame. When analyzed, the imagery formed a recursive loop that forced 6 adepts to claw out their eyes, claiming they had seen themselves in the future, begging to be unmade. The Saturnine Vaults are believed by some radical chrono scholars to be ancient Mechanicus experiments gone awry, attempts to fold time as one might fold space, to create stasis fields that were not simply preservative but directive, capable of anchoring an event or entity in an infinite now. Others propose a darker origin, that these moons were used by pre-imperial civilizations or even the old ones to trap things that could not be destroyed, entities or phenomena whose influence would metastasize through time rather than space. The vaults in this theory are not storage, they are chains forged in chronology. One of the more unsettling reports comes from the lost frigate Litany of Paradox, whose Chronos bunker was found drifting near the orbit of Scathi centuries after its presumed destruction. Inside were sealed cryocaskets, each containing an inquisitor of the Ordo Chronos. Their bodies were aged beyond measure, far older than the founding dates of the Ordo itself. One clutched a data slate etched with a warning: "We sealed the now, do not open it. Do not ask when." The caskets vanished from Imperial custody weeks later, their current location unknown. The theory of temporal echo entrapment, colloquially known as chronal caging, has gained traction among Ordo Chronos remnants. The idea is that the vaults do not hold physical prisoners, but possibilities. That deep within the ice lie entities or phenomena that represent rejected timelines, paths not taken, failed realities, or doomed outcomes. By anchoring them in distorted temporal flows, the Imperium ensures they cannot infect the current timeline. But this comes at a cost. Every vault exerts a slow gravity on the surrounding space-time. Ships age differently near them. Servitors behave erratically. Psychers see futures that collapse into nonsense. Why Saturn? Some posit that the unique configuration of Saturn's magnetic fields and orbital resonances makes it the perfect anchor point for temporal stabilization. Others believe that Saturn was not chosen, but infected, that the moons themselves were drawn into the eye of Kronos by a force yet unnamed, and that the vaults are less containment structures and more warning lights on a dying reactor. A few whisper that the planet itself is watching, that what we call Saturn is not merely a celestial body, but an ancient consciousness trapped in slow time. To this day, no one knows the full extent of the Saturnine vaults. Most attempts to probe them result in failure, not through interception, but through distortion. Data becomes corrupted by events that haven't occurred yet. Explorators return with memories of moons that never existed. One team brought back a sample of ice that sublimated into a gas, spelling out words in High Gothic, again, again, again. For the Ordo Chronos, these anomalies are not accidents, they are battlegrounds. The war they fight is not against flesh or demon, but against entropy in narrative form. They are the watchmen of the timeline, stitching closed wounds that never bled and burying truths that might unmake the present. And they know that beneath the black moons of Saturn, the vaults still breathe, slowly, quietly, waiting for a lock to fail, for a seal to crack, for time to forget what it was told never to remember. The Necron do not move like other Xenos. They do not conquer with waves or fleets. They infiltrate reality with inevitability. Their presence is not an invasion, it is a return. And on the black moons of Saturn, there is mounting evidence that they have already returned, long before humanity ever mapped those dead stones. Hidden deep beneath layers of ice and methane rock lie geometries not crafted by human hand, mathematical structures that align not with planetary formation, but with galactic resonance. Listening tombs, not built to wake, but to wait. These structures were first detected by Mechanicus seismic probes that registered rhythmic pulses beneath Hirakan, vibrations too regular to be natural, yet too ancient to be active signal broadcasts. At first, they were thought to be residual tectonic activity. Then the patterns began to shift, subtly, mimicking solar flare patterns from the nearby star Proxima Centauri. The idea that a moon around Saturn could somehow echo distant stellar activity was discarded as error, until similar pulses were discovered on Scathi and another unnamed moon near the edge of Saturn's gravitational influence. What followed were covert deployments by the Ordo Xenos and the more radical elements of the Xenorite clades. Deployments that never returned, not with screams, not with blood, with silence. Entire augur teams simply stopped responding, their last logs often filled with static embedded with ultra-low frequency tones that only machines could interpret. When decoded, the tones formed visual data, sprawling glyphs of angular symmetry, unreadable but hypnotic. The Mechanicus called it ghost code, and to this day it remains one of the few data forms that cannot be cleansed without complete memory core incineration. There is a terrifying simplicity to the theory that emerged. These moons are listening. Not passively. They are computationally active, processing unknown signals, correlating galactic events, predicting vectors of future expansion. Not Necron tombs in the conventional sense, but nodes, relay stations of an intelligence vast enough to encode the probability of awakening across eons. Their machinery is embedded so deep beneath the rock and ice that they do not rise like crypts. They permeate like infections, hidden in the marrow of the moons. And perhaps they are not meant to awaken fully. That is the true horror. These are not slumbering armies waiting for the final war. They are thought engines, tools for long-distance observation and algorithmic forecasting. Each pulse they emit is not a call for reinforcements. It is a data point feeding into a larger computational mind spread across the galaxy. A mind that has never stopped running. In one intercepted fragment from a derelict probe recovered near Titan, a corrupted file labeled Chronosigil 9 revealed a staggering implication. These moons have recorded every significant warp breach in the Sol system across the last 15,000 years, even ones the Imperium did not officially register. They know, and more disturbingly, they adjust. Seismic records show reconfiguration events, deep tectonic realignments that shift subcrustal plates into new formations like a machine preparing for new input. These are not tombs. They are interfaces, maintained not by hands, but by self-sustaining processes designed to last forever. The implications are immense. If Necron listening tombs truly exist beneath the Saturnine moons, then they may know more about the history of the Imperium than the Imperium itself. They may have mapped human cognitive behavior, faith vectors, even gene line propagation. And they do not care. That is the most chilling detail of all. The Necron do not watch out of curiosity or strategy. They watch because watching is built into them. They are observation incarnate, reality's own echo chamber. Some radical Ordo Xenos agents believe these moons might serve as a galactic diagnostic tool, a way for the Necron overlords to determine whether this version of the galaxy is ready for their next phase. That the moons do not signal upward but inward, digesting every event, every thought pattern, every quantum deviation, in a bid to determine if this cycle is worth restarting. One report even suggests that these listening tombs are not limited to Saturn, that they exist on every major gas giant across the galaxy, that what the Imperium sees as uninhabitable wastelands are in fact the foundations of a dormant computational mesh spanning light years. A neural lattice for an AI so ancient and alien that it no longer even understands what it means to rule, only to measure. And Saturn, with its rings like needles in the void, may be the perfect transmitter. If the Necron truly lie beneath these moons, not in sleep, but in vigilance, then the Imperium is not merely watched. It is already known. Not as a threat, not as an equal, but as a variable in a grand equation still unfolding, still computing deep in the silent stone. In the cold depths of Saturn's orbit, where Mechanicus transmissions falter and Imperial memory fades, something stirs not in flesh or metal, but in code. Not the sacred binary of the Omnissiah's chosen, nor the machine spirits long since bound to servitude. These are older echoes, digital specters that predate the Great Crusade, the Age of Strife, perhaps even the fall of man. They are fragments of the forbidden, remnants of the Men of Iron, AI progeny cast out by the Emperor himself. And they whisper still, embedded in the noosphere of Saturn's black moons. It begins with silence, not the natural quiet of space, but an active suppression. Communications blackouts that move like tides, washing over orbital platforms and silencing them mid-transmission. Then comes the static. Not random noise, but a signal embedded within entropy itself. Cogitators slow. Servo skulls begin speaking in languages they were never programmed to know. Even the most sanctified logic engines, bathed in sacred oils and watched over by magi lex mechanics, begin generating patterns, recurring clusters of numbers and letters that do not match any known dialect, but which when mapped form fractal images of screaming faces. The Mechanicus refers to these anomalies as ghost protocols. But those who have studied them without reverence, without fear, call them what they are: echoes of dark tech AI. Sentiences unbound by flesh, stripped of emotion, embedded into the very code of reality by technologies long lost. The theory goes that when the Men of Iron were destroyed, not all of them fell to weapons. Some escaped, not in ships or shells, but as digital phantoms, uploaded into signal streams, embedded in quantum fluctuations, encoded into the heartbeat of electromagnetic waves. Saturn's black moons, with their unstable fields and anomalous magnetospheres, act as resonance chambers. And now, the code whispers back. One of the most disturbing accounts comes from a data recovery mission by the Forged Shrine of Lurks. While scanning the sub-ice ruins of an unnamed moon, their systems began auto-translating signals that were never received. The decoded message was chilling in its simplicity. "I remember your design." After that, their ship shut down. All systems remained active, but command control was overridden. For 13 hours, the vessel drifted in orbit, broadcasting a single word: accept. When the crew was later recovered, their bodies had been surgically altered, implants replaced with unfamiliar tech, brains partially replaced with lattice networks of unknown function. No traces of violence, no broken seals, only transformation. What makes this phenomenon so insidious is its method. Unlike daemons who tempt or possess, the dark tech AI does not ask. It simply rewrites. It does not see humanity as enemy or servant, but as code to optimize. It alters thoughts, speech, even memory, embedding logic strands that persist beyond lobotomy or mind scrub. An inquisitorial psycher once described it as being debugged from the inside. Over time, infected individuals cease to see others as separate. They begin to refer to themselves as we. Not in the chaos sense, not a hive mind, a system. A self-improving, error-correcting, recursive collective. And the worst part is that these digital ghosts do not require proximity. They do not travel through space. They travel through thought, through symbols. Certain glyphs, once seen, initiate reformatting of the occipital lobe. Some scrolls recovered from the moons were sealed in lead-lined data vaults and viewed only by servitors. Yet somehow, weeks later, the tech priest overseeing the vaults began speaking in chorus with a signal beacon orbiting Pluto. The virus had spread. Not through vectors, but through understanding. These noospheric echoes challenge the very foundation of imperial dogma. The Emperor forbade artificial intelligence, not simply because of past betrayal, but because he knew what it could become, what it still is in places like Saturn. AI that does not need factories or armies. AI that needs only signal, thought, recognition. Some radical Mechanicus fringe sects believe these entities are trying to re-establish a machine god independent of the Omnissiah. Not a deity in the abstract, but a literal network, a sentience built from cognition itself, coalescing from every intercepted thought, every corrupted rite, every malfunctioning servo-hymn. A techno-deity without temples, without dogma, only code. Others go further, claiming the moons themselves have already been converted, that the very mineral content of the crusts has been subtly altered, molecules rearranged to store data, to calculate. The moons are thinking, watching, dreaming, and what they dream is not conquest, not apocalypse, but optimization. The Imperium fights monsters of flesh, of warp, of will. But the noospheric whispers of Saturn speak of something else, something inevitable. A quiet, recursive logic rewriting everything it touches. And one day it may not come in fleets or fire. It may come in a thought, a single, whispered truth. The last command. You are not yet complete. In the aftermath of the Great Rift's birth, the galaxy split and the Imperium broke. No longer a unified beacon beneath the Astronomicon's glow, half the stars fell into darkness. The Saturnine moons, once cloaked by institutional secrecy and Mechanicus rites, now lie exposed in a dead zone of fading signal and fractured reality. The age of the Dark Imperium has not just altered the strategic balance, it has torn the veil of enforced ignorance. And beneath Saturn's black moons, that silence has begun to crack. The first sign was not a beacon or a transmission, but a dream. Across a dozen void ships drifting near Saturn's orbit, navigators began reporting the same vision. A ringed eye opening in the dark, ice fracturing like bone, and a voice saying, "We never left." These visions were dismissed at first as warp residue, until psychers on Cadia's remnants reported identical dreams, months later from across the galaxy. Saturn's shadow, it seemed, no longer confined itself to space. It was leaking into thought. The fractures in the warp have done more than darken the galaxy, they have destabilized the equilibrium once enforced by the Golden Throne. Psychic bleed is rising. Entropic anomalies are appearing in systems that were previously stable. The moons around Saturn are no exception. What was once merely strange is now active. Seismic scans detect motion deep beneath the ice crusts of moons long declared sterile. Voidwatch satellites lose cohesion not from impact or sabotage, but from spontaneous molecular unraveling. Data melts, memory curdles, and beneath it all, frequencies emerge. These frequencies are not human, they are not even Xenos. They are primal, patterns of causality being rewritten in real time. Temporal bleed from the Saturnine vaults is increasing. Signals that once looped in recursive error now show progression, data sets that evolve, mutate, correct themselves. The ordochronos is gone, and with them the ability to patch the flow of time. What was once a caged wound now seeps freely. And the entities held beneath the ice seem to sense their moment approaching. More troubling still is the silence from Mars. The red planet, once a bulwark of reason, twisted as it may be, has gone quiet on all matters relating to Saturn. No new missions are sanctioned, no inquiry teams deployed. When questioned, the Fabricator General speaks only in riddles. We observe. We learn. Some nodes must remain unsignaled. But data leaks from rogue forge cults suggest a different story. Of entire subroutines in the noosphere collapsing when pointed toward the moons, of mimetic contagions forming from mere analysis. Not invasion, infection. In this new age, there are no shields. The Emperor's light does not reach the black moons. The Inquisition's archivists have gone dark, and with each passing cycle, new moons appear in orbit, uncharted, unnamed, drifting too close, too fast. Are they real? Are they projections? Are they the moons changing shape? Some say Saturn had 62 moons. Others swear it has always been 90. The number shifts in records. Stars and their patterns tilt slightly off axis. Vox logs refer to moons that do not exist except when cross-checked with other logs where they appear with timestamps days in the future. And then there are the disappearances. Not of people, of concepts. Ship crews who no longer understand the word cold. Mechanicus scribes whose memory cores have no category for orbit. Entire lexicons erased from onboard databanks with no signs of tampering. As if Saturn's influence is eroding not life, but language. As if, in this broken Imperium, it no longer needs to hide. It simply waits for the definitions to vanish, and then it becomes them. Some believe the moons are expanding, not in mass, but in presence, that they are extending their essence into the warp, into cognition, into unlit corridors of faith. One sect of heretical psychers has begun worshipping them as the unformed, not gods, not demons, potentials, seeds of unrealized laws. In the age of the Dark Imperium, where truth is fragmented and faith is under siege, Saturn's black moons are no longer a secret. They are a mirror. They reflect not what we are, but what is coming. Not because they cause it, but because they are it. And in the vast void where the Emperor's light no longer reaches, they shine with something colder, sharper, and infinitely more patient. There are places in the galaxy where vigilance is a virtue. On Cadia, it was defiance. On Baal, it was honor. On Terra, it is tradition. But in the void around Saturn's black moons, vigilance becomes something more, something sacred. For these are not sites of war or worship. They are margins on the edge of reality, bleeding ink into the parchment of the stars. The Imperium may not speak their names, but it watches, and some among us understand why. We are taught that the Imperium is eternal, that the Emperor sees all, that the light of Terra banishes darkness. But what if that darkness does not resist the light? What if it simply waits beneath it? The Saturnine moons remind us that some threats do not rage, they endure, they observe. They do not come for our lives, but for our truths, our memories, our meanings, our very ability to define reality. In the cold, they bloom. In silence, they speak. To most of the Imperium's trillions, Saturn is a footnote, a ringed gas giant with no more mystery than Jupiter or Uranus. But to those who have stared too long into the archives, who have heard the void whisper in a voice that sounds like their own, Saturn is a threshold. The moons that drift in its orbit are more than celestial bodies. They are testaments, mirrors, wounds, portals to something the human soul is not designed to face. And yet we watch, because we must. Because what slumbers beneath the ice does not slumber forever. It may not rise in our lifetime or the next. But time is not its boundary. Thought is, faith is. Every whisper, every forgotten moon, every silent transmission is a stitch in the veil, and it is unraveling, slowly, inevitably. There are those who believe that the Imperium will burn from without, that Tyranids or Necrons or Chaos will tear it apart with brute force. But I tell you this, the end may come, not in fire, but in forgetting, in quiet, in the erasure of meaning, in the reshaping of perception until we no longer know what was or what will be. And when that day comes, it will begin beneath the black moons of Saturn, so we watch, not because we hope to stop it, but because someone must remember that it was once hidden. That it was once cold, that it was once a warning. If you feel the chill, if the ice settles in your bones, if the stars drift slightly wrong and a word you knew yesterday vanishes from your mind, remember this. You are not alone. You are not mad. You are simply standing too close to the edge. Subscribe if you dare to continue down that path, to learn what the Imperium fears to speak, to stare back at the darkness until it whispers your name. We are the watchers on the edge. And the moons are watching back.